Good afternoon, everybody. For this next session, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Milos and Pritesh, who will tell us how the Lakehouse platform is helping customers in the public sector. So over to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. So yeah, welcome everyone. Our talk's on fair or foul data, public sector Lakehouse as a fair platform. We'll go through the principles of what that is. I'm here with my colleague Milos. I lead our UK public sector team, and Milos?
Yeah, we together partner on driving both the sales and the technical vision for our public sector in UK and I. So, yeah.
Excellent. So look, what we're going to cover today is, what is fair? It's around that sort of findability, accessibility. We're looking at interoperability and reusability and how that links to the Lakehouse platform. We think it goes very neatly hand in hand, and we'll walk through that for the rest of the presentation. So what we see fair being is a cycle. Is a cycle around that, making sure when you're building your data lifecycle that your data is findable, that your users can find it and access it appropriately, the right permissions are granted, and then through that data lifecycle as well, it will need to interoperate with other systems, and then finally, as that data product or data lifecycle matures, it will need to be used by other people. In a public sector context, it's quite obvious from a policy perspective, policy implementation perspective, that this is done. And it also, we've combined it in this sort of introduction as well for building good data products in general. So the pyramid of that really starts with the usefulness of the data that you're producing. Is it explorable and searchable as well? The simplicity, the scalability, and I think almost when that maturity happens, the habit generation is what we want to achieve, right? So when you get those foundations correct, that both your internal users, your external users, almost habitually and seamlessly can access that data and use it for its intended purpose. But we'll talk through more how we actually look to do that. Josh?
I think you need one more slide.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, and from the product perspective as well, when we are operating in government context or in general in regulated industries and with a lot of restrictions and constraints and policies that enforce the behavior, how do we map then the product design best practices into that system? Usually what we see is actually the best practices are very transferable across industries, and a lot of policies and advice has been built thinking about those best practices. They just may not use always the same terminology. They may also not always put it in the same shape and form. So here what we're trying also to illustrate is that parallelism, you see this cyclical notion of the product being introduced to serve a purpose. That's the usefulness part. And then it matures and grows as long as it promotes best practices. That's the habit generation bit. And at some point, eventually it declines because either there is a better product or the problem has been solved. On the right-hand side, you see the government proposed flow for building the good data products. And while it looks very different, it actually follows very similar implicit cyclical nature. So you need to plan and identify the need and the purpose of the products. Once you then collect your data, you build those data products, and then you use them and process. And the process actually generates new products and new usefulness. So there is an implicit feedback loop there. It's just not illustrated on it. And can we go to the next slide, please? What is also another way of looking at data products within the domain is through a lens of economy. And I think we're, with the sustainability taking quite a central topic in many industries and many discussions, we talk about this linear principle of economy as a legacy way of observing an economy where we extract the resources, we produce the products, and then eventually once we have no use for them, we dispose. And a similar thing actually happens in legacy platforms in the data, so that's why we call it a linear data economy. where we generate data, we refine, we filter, we use it to make decisions. The difference is with this virtual product is that we actually accumulate a lot of it. You can't just delete the data after you have made the decision about policy or legislation. So you need to keep it for audit purposes and for historical view. Next one.
Yeah, and this is the important thing, right? That it can be quite easy, especially in a government context when it takes a fair amount of investment to get some of these things going. If you look at it in a flywheel concept, for example, building out big infrastructure projects, any sort of large data project can feel like a while to get going. And then it's quite easier to fall into the linear aspect of things, as we showed in the last slide. But it's important to keep this circular motion feedback loop going and applying that both from a product perspective in general, program perspective as well, and then into your data products built within your environment and settings. So that's really one of the key takeaways here that we wanted to express. So starting with the findability in FAIR. So one of the things that people have to navigate is their own organizational structures. So the way that you're set up, be it centralized or decentralized, has a factor in how you can go and find that data. And in both modes, there are opportunities and approaches to do that, but typically we see the barriers, right? So if I look at certain centralized organizations, they can hold a real moat or guard around that data, often for the right reasons, for security, for governance, but everyone has to come to the center and try and get that. And then sometimes it kind of, that organization is is kind of evolving all the time, and this decentralization can happen as well, where people go out and build their own silos and their own kind of versions of those organizations and extend that to a data perspective as well, because they're not getting what they need from a centralized perspective. Sometimes that's actually done intentionally federated as well, so the structures, if you look from a federal to localized government perspective, is one such scenario. The other way is around these kind of like, you know, the greenfield and the brownfield, right? So Milos touched on the legacy element of things, and these things have been around since the beginning of time. And we're seeing a lot of people in government going, well, okay, I'm not going to be able to sort of do much with the stuff in the brownfield. Let's go create a greenfield and start from scratch. And it's quite easy to build new technologies and start afresh. However, some of the critical data infrastructure and key assets for government exist within that brownfield. So it's about crossing that divide and finding ways to interoperate. And what we're finding is that, I've kind of stolen a bit of thunder from interoperability, but finding ways in which to make that happen is going to be crucial and key. And we believe sort of open standards underpins that. But we'll go into that more in a little while. And then finally, sort of this analogy here, I once had a government data scientist tell me his frustrations of having to come in via what he called the front door to get data from within his own organization to do the work that he needed to do for policy improvement and policy decisions. And, you know, the work he was doing, you know, was contributing towards some really important net zero goals and for the department. And he kind of going, why is he a sort of almost second-class citizen? Because of the federated and decentralization of different departments within that one main department. So yeah, we've heard this sort of analogy before in a few situations. So what's the solution, Milos?
So yeah, what we found in practice to be the solution for a lot of this fragmentation and discoverability or findability, as you put it in FAIR, is the centralized governance, and through Unity Catalog, and through a simplified way of handling that governance piece of who can access what. So you can still keep your data decentralized across business units or teams, directorates, etc., but then keep that access patterns unified through a standardized way of operating on permissions. And why is that very powerful is that you have concepts of internal tables that are fully managed by Unity Catalog, but you also can manage external tables that have been built by other tools. And finally, you can, with some recent announcement, you can also manage files directly on the containers within your cloud storage. And this is some things that we've walked through in private previews, and while the evaluation has been going, it's proving quite interesting for many specialized use cases where you have to operate on custom formats, so we don't enforce you into a place where you actually have to convert things, which also breaks apart the principles of FAIRs. It makes things much more complicated. I think the cherry on the top is how easy it is to actually manage the permissions. It's grant statements, so it's very declarative. It's based on SQL standards. It's much more accessible from the perspective of the people that need to manage those permissions can do that very easily. If you top that with the fact that we have also Terraform providers and other open technologies, it becomes much more scalable, so you can also build scripts around it and onboard whole units in a very easy manner. That allows us also, now that we have that single management layer that combines the permissions and the listing of the data, you can go and search through all of your estate, and if you have permissions to access that data, they will appear in the searches, and you can easily discover it and go from there.
So logically, next is accessibility, but actually we just want to sort of muddle up the FAIR acronym to start with interoperability. Essentially, in the interoperability mode, when you're trying to work that out in your systems of data, and you look faced with something like this, which is a heterogeneous number of systems with different formats, different colors, shapes, and sizes, it can seem very difficult to work out how to bring one system to another, let alone multiple systems talking to each other internally in your organization. So where would you go? You'd normally start to sort of categorize this into these sub-verticals or sub-categories, where you go, right, these sort of databases can talk to each other, so we bring them together, organize in a very structured way, but then essentially that lets certain types of unstructured or semi-structured data left out in the cold, and also rigid kind of frameworks of connection which don't necessarily work in practice as well. So what you need is, we're trying to think of an analogy for this, an organization of these different data systems with mapped out interconnectivity. So I don't know those who've been having a lot of coffee this week, but this is the chemical module for caffeine. So we thought it was a good, neat kind of arrangement of those different molecules and then the interconnectedness between them. And that's what we need to sort of strive for, is that organization, but interconnectedness. And really, the Lakehouse platform provides a really good opportunity to be a home for all different shapes and sizes of data within your organization, be it unstructured, semi-structured, streaming. You may have seen this sort of Lakehouse platform before, so I won't go into too much detail, but I think underpinned by the governance that you have with Unity Catalog, and also a ubiquitous sort of format within Delta Lake, I think is, and again, some of the announcements around Delta Lake 3.0 further reinforces, that ability to interoperate furthermore. So that's what's really exciting there. I think, again, reflecting on some of the keynote this morning, the contributions to the Lakehouse platform and its components from an open source perspective are really significant. That was talked about to a great deal of extent, but we see common formats as well, furthermore within government, really focusing on things like SQL and R as well, and we want to look to make those first-class citizens within the Lakehouse platform as part of the ecosystem. And finally, sort of some of these open source projects that we've been able to contribute from an EMEA public sector point of view. So check out our projects around Arc, which we've used around entity resolution and doing that in an open source manner. We worked with Ministry of Justice to build that accelerator and take that to a variety of different government departments. We've used Kakapo with a kind of financial services regulator kind of lens on things and looking for that anomaly detection that you need to do in the structure of the market. And Milos, I don't know if you want to comment on Mosaic. It's very topical.
Yeah, sure. And Mosaic we used in a little bit more horizontal perspective, not to be confused with Mosaic ML. This is a geospatial package, and because geospatial is quite pervasive in government, you have it almost in any department. We actually built it with from ground up with one of our major customers, Ordnance Survey. So we started as a workshop, and then we built a whole project that's now being used by more than 150 organizations worldwide. So it's quite and this is from a local team. And I think that's also very important that while we as a company have that ethos of contributing to the open source, it actually permeates into local teams that are aligned to different industries, and we really strive to work together with the customers and if something doesn't exist on the market, build it together. And another one also very interesting would be Dolly. I think we're having now this acceleration around these foundational models, language models, large language models. And I think where we're seeing the shift is these will be accessible very soon to almost everybody. The differentiator will be your own internal data, things you want to keep a control of, and that bring technology to your data into the Lakehouse. This is what Dolly actually enables you to do. You can keep your data, which is your most valuable resource, your IP, and then bring the modeling techniques to that data and learn from your local data and fine-tune it. And I just wanted to make a point around the cloud. I think one other very important thing around interoperability is not enforcing a single cloud, not enforcing any vendor lock-in. So we do provide our platform in exactly the same way across all of the 3 major clouds. So that's very important because we will not force neither you nor your partners into a specific single architecture on a single vendor. And to put everything into full perspective, obviously, and this aligns very closely to that molecule of coffee, all of those different pieces need to work and interoperate together. For that, you actually have a wider ecosystem. There are solutions that have been part of your platform for years, decades, and we actually interoperate with many of those technologies. Now, this slide is actually too small. We had to make quite a significant cut. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of other partners. Just a sample few for specific different types, like data ingestion, like machine learning, and also your regional or global SIs that help you deliver those use cases to your teams. It's really important to work together to deliver that vision of a data platform for public sector and for the good of the citizens.
100%. I mean, I was really enthused going around the expo a couple of times this week and speaking to all the different partners we have out there. Really out of the box, it's quite easy to integrate with Databricks, but they're very keen to invest ways in which to walk to the Lakehouse platform, knowing how open we are, making it easier for their customers to use their products that are specialized in some of these areas. I think Databricks doesn't necessarily take that approach of having to be all things to everyone. So really rich ecosystem coming together. I've seen it at recent AWS and Microsoft events and now this week, and it's been really great to see that ecosystem coming together to build those outcomes for our customers, and a host of partners, as Milos said as well, in terms of implementing that from the global ones that you see up there, and even local ones that we work with as well in addition, like your Kanos's and your advancing analytics as well. So, accessibility.
Yeah, we came back to the accessibility. So I think one of the important things about accessibility is also how you have built something, how is that platform in general evolved. A lot of enterprise even, so if we step abstract a little bit from the public sector, enterprise as well, they have started building platforms in many different locations to serve certain use cases. And as the time evolved, they had to bring everything into an umbrella. I think in government, that's even more emphasized because of the specialization of different departments to deliver a specific purpose. And then you may have also directorates under those departments, again, further focusing on a specific delivery and outcome. There may happen to be a very organic way of growing a platform and then trying to make those things now form a unit at the end. And that can be really a daunting task. Now, on the opposite spectrum, if you start building all of your capabilities from the best practices in mind, and that's one of the reasons why we're talking about good product design, which is not necessarily something that usually you hear when you talk about technologies. You start with architecture diagrams rather than a product principles, but it's really important to start from the best practices, from a lean design, from following the standards that others in your ecosystem are going to follow, because then you have that planned growth. You know, all of a sudden everything kind of aligns and creates that symmetry and coherence.
A bit like our t-shirts, Miloš.
Exactly. And then expanding a little bit on that centralized versus decentralized view, it's very important when you have that organization is how you share the data then. So it goes back to interoperability when we're talking about accessibility, and one of the common themes in this whole consideration is no letter is decoupled fully from the other. So when you think about one concept, the other one kind of creeps in. But the way we share data obviously is governed by many things, sometimes about the classification of the data, and you shouldn't share, and we are investing heavily in addressing some of those concepts through concerns through concepts like cleanrooms. And in other cases, it's an open data, and you actually need to share it even outside of the public sector domain. And this is where we talk about this distributed data sharing network, where you may have a combination of technology partners, regulated bodies, regulators, all needing to share data in a different capacity between each other, and they all may reside in different cloud deployments. Some may even be still on premise. It becomes a very
Messy,
challenging and messy situation. So if we go to how we go about solving that, so our focus was in designing open technologies. We've said that several times, but to fortify that, we came up with this protocol called Delta sharing. So key components of it are all open source. So Delta as a format, Delta Lake is an open source project. It's one of the most popular open source project. Then we use that format and build an open protocol on top of it that allows you to easily share data from your lake to other organizations while maintaining a full control. Everything is built from the security principles first. So we have a lot of collateral out there, blogs and documentation covering all of the things you can do from the security perspective, so you know that you're not oversharing and you're not leaking anything. But what that allows you then to do, given that it's an open protocol and it's agnostic with respect to which cloud and which platform, you can share between organizations, within an organization, and you can also share off and on cloud, meaning that these services, because they're open source, can be installed on premise, and you can use them to share data into cloud and accelerate some migration use cases, for instance. The best part, at least in my opinion, is the fact how quickly that got adopted by the community. So we have to put these 3 dots in the slide where we can't list all of the connectors because they are new ones being built every day, and it's already quite a big list, but we have support for ingesting data as if it was your local data, so you don't really need to think about it's on another server. In Python, in Java, Rust, C++, Node.js, and many other languages are coming, and also in your very common tools for BI, like Power BI, Tableau. One of my favorites is also Excel. I talked yesterday about that, but that's one of the certainties of life. Excel will never go away. And yeah, next slide. We've used then that set of tooling to build the marketplace, and you've heard an announcement this week around that going GA. So the delta sharing is the building component for the marketplace. And what we talk about here is not just data, it's any product built using data. So we're talking about derivatives as well, models, dashboards, notebooks, code. All of that can be shared using the same mechanism.
And it's, you know, there is more and more mandates coming down. We'll touch on some of these from top down in government to share that data across each other. At the same time, you know, they come across the challenges internally about what are the rules of sharing from one organization to other. We believe that this can help solve both the delta sharing and marketplace concepts, can help overcome some of these challenges where you can fortify and justify who owns the data, where that data goes as part of the lineage, and provide, you know, the regulators and the compliance people on both sides the comfort that they need, that you're looking after the data in the way it was originally intended as well.
And one more concept within the exchange of data would be that of cleanrooms. I think very central to what we do in the government, because in many cases you'll have data that's classified at a top secret or restricted type of classification. How do you then extract insight from those assets across departments without actually oversharing or exposing data in a wrong way? Clean rooms, you can think of them in a high level as a one-off disposable compute. You can delta share data into it, but no individual party can interactively access the data. Data will be executed against a code which is treated as a logical contract. These are the only operations that will be operated on it. And if the results are compliant, they can either be shared to both parties or only to the one party. You can enforce a different classification to the results than you did to the input data, again, with respecting the policy in place. Quite a powerful concept also for organizations that have a hybrid design where some of their data had to remain on premise, even while they want to use technologies available on the cloud, because the data will only ever exist on a fully encrypted channel and then be completely disposed after.
And really we're on to the final letter of reusability, and also the slant we put in is reproducibility as well. It's about really moving away from, you know, you can have some really whizzy Ferrari or Mercedes in this case with you not being sure what's under the hood, but actually making sure that we build these data platforms in a way which you can see the internal componentry, and even after the fact it can be audited and looked back on for that transparency purpose is super important within a government context. And this is where that lineage starts to sort of really play a role, making sure that you see the line of sight on where that data goes through its journey.
Yeah, exactly. And it might not be an obvious reason why we're talking about lineage in a context of reusability and reproducibility, but think it in a perspective of, in order to use or reuse or reproduce something, you need to know how it's been built. So it's very important when you are consuming data that you trust that data. And again, how can you trust the data if you don't know how it has been constructed? So lineage provides you a very granular way of viewing how did I come up with this value in the end, the value that I'm sharing with somebody externally. Well, through going through these steps. And one of the powers of the platform is that actually anything you do in Databricks will be tracked, and you will have that lineage. It came from this table, combined with this table, this filter was applied. And as we further evolve the platform concepts, like we have applied this machine learning model in this step, and you can inspect which model will come into play. And yeah, I said the word model, so obviously the next slide is about models. We have mlflow as one of our other very successful open source project. This is another protocol focused on the governance around, now not data, but concepts that generate data. So machine learning models will generate data. They will generate predictions. They will generate forecasts. So you can think of them as something that produces data based on observed data. again, in order to use this to make material decisions, you again need to trust them. And in order to trust them, you need to have a very good governance and audit trail and explainability of them. So we built mlflow in order to track how a model has been produced. And it's not a simple concept. We talk about models in a almost like a aloof way, but you actually need to know which data, at which point in time, which parameters have been used, how many of the experiments have been run. I say the best model, how do I know this is the best model, so how I evaluated that. All of that needs to be bundled together in order to actually go and make a material decision that can actually influence a policy, or I don't know, I used to work in finance, influence if somebody gets a mortgage, so it needs to be really tight ship around that. So mlflow provides you actually a very easy set of APIs to get all of that, and inside of Databricks, any model you train will automatically get all of these things tracked and linked, and you can just click through and see all of the concepts that I've listed.
And really that brings us back to, we've gone through the whole FAIR concept. We've brought some of the parallels in terms of ways we think we can help solve and make life easier to apply that FAIR context into building your data products, into keeping it a circular motion, not a linear motion. That life cycle as well, Milos, that you talked about, right?
Yeah, and I would say for me, I know it's a busy slide, there is a lot of concepts, and I wouldn't necessarily say any of them is more important than the other, but I would probably single out the habit generation. I think that's really important, that anything you build is easy to follow, and there is a pool to follow, because there is a value of those decisions and those actions. So always focus when you're designing platforms and solutions into that idea of it should promote the best practices and best standards.
Yeah, and the value, Milos, you talked about taking that thread forward here, right? So the value's been driven from both bottom up. We can see the community coming together, our partners from a technology perspective as well, but also from the top down, government are realizing the importance of getting this right. We had the National Data Strategy from the UK published a couple of years ago, and that's really being doubled down on ahead of focus and the rise of AI, but making sure that that's done in a safe manner for the citizen to give reassurance. So here's Rishi Sunak met Joe Biden recently, and in the autumn, looking to do an AI for Safety conference where they look to provide some of those principles, and I can bet bottom dollar that FAIR will kind of play a role into that concept. And we've seen this from a federal strategy, data strategy perspective as well, embedding these principles and kind of patterns of interoperability, reusability, and making sure it's accessible to the right people at the right levels. And finally as well with our Australian counterparts in government as well, similar frameworks exist to reinforce this. So the value is definitely seen and understood, top down from government. It's now about sort of getting that out there and rolling it out. And really, why we need to do it from another perspective is these insights and policy decisions lead to citizen outcomes. In the last 3 years, we've seen a number of activities that have happened in a very short period of time, from the likes of COVID, through to the inflationary pressures, through to some of the conflicts that have happened, that have meant that governments and citizens together have had to adapt to quite extreme scenarios very quickly, and not having the right sort of principles set within your data leads to sometimes less transparent decision-making, incorrect decision-making because they don't have access to the data. And you can see here, like, less than 3% of that data is being really used to make that critical decision-making. We really want to see that grow in kind of value and importance as people start to adopt more best practice within their data, both in the brownfield and new greenfield kind of scenarios. And I think that transformation of that legacy and also going back into the legacy and taking that data is critical to that, as well as driving the modernization programs that, if you're here in the room, you're probably part and parcel of driving that modernization program within your departments day to day. And also like the ownership of that data. Milos touched on this earlier. As the rise of Gen AI and LLMs grows, it becomes even more important that you're able to give that transparency and that focus. It's very small up there, but like, you know, Italy was one of the first governments to actually ban the use of ChatGPT, just because they, you know, don't feel comfortable about where that data sits and lives and what its usage might be. So I think this is, you know, we're going to see some of these reactions from government entities when they don't feel ready, whereas if we can work within a very ubiquitous way, glass box approach, explainable data models and data products that we build, governments will feel confident going in front of citizens and putting that in front of them as well to say these are the solutions and the ways out. And that depth of knowledge is going to be critical from a skills perspective as well to sort of generate those models in a way which aren't hidden to, you know, your everyday citizen. And finally, look, I'll leave you with, you know, a few points here. What is the opportunity from this study here, where they talked about the opportunity to engage citizens more, to go and get some of the best talent out there as well, because the missions that we drive through government are unique across any other industry, and the impact we can make from a citizen's outcome perspective, quality of life perspective, the policy and decisions we make both for domestic and international policy can be really critical for the outcomes of citizens, and feeding data into that in both a transparent way, in an effective way, is going to be crucial and important. And yeah, generally grow the efficiency like is happening across a lot of different industries within government is the opportunity that lays in front of us. So, you know, we're going to need to do it together as part of a whole data ecosystem. And we look forward to playing our part and working with a lot of people. So with that, say thank you, and happy to take any questions.